Very good morning and greetings from the Asian Confluence. Welcome to this webinar, which is a curtain raiser webinar, the first of a two-part series. As a curtain raiser to the Prime Ministerial Summit that happens in New Delhi, when Prime Minister Takaichi, the Prime Minister of Japan, will visit New Delhi for a summit meeting with the Indian Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi ji. In today's webinar, we have very esteemed panelists and experts on the India-Japan relationship to go over the entire gamut of the relationship and also focus on the strategic connectivity in the Indo-Pacific and I take this opportunity to welcome the chair of this webinar, Ambassador Deepa Gopalan Wadhwa, who is a esteemed member of the Governing Council of Asian Confluence, and she has served as our ambassador in Japan. Welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you for joining us. We also welcome I'd also like to welcome Ambassador Kenji Hiramatsu, who served as Japan's ambassador in New Delhi, and of course, is a very leading figure in the diplomatic and strategic community. I also must say that he has been a pioneering force in the India-Japan collaborations, bringing them to the Northeast. I think you laid the seeds of the Kizuna dialogue, Ambassador, so we always remember that. We are also joined by Ranjit Borthakur, who's a very leading business and philanthropic figure from the Northeast. And of course, he joins us from Mumbai today, and he's the head of the Balipara Foundation. He also runs the Balipara Dialogue, which is very famous. And of course, we are joined by also Dr. Munish Tongumbam, who is with the Chintan Research Foundation and a leading voice in the strategic community. So welcome. I'd also like to welcome our viewers who join us online. Please post your questions, and I think at the end of this, towards the end, there will be some time to take questions from the panelists. So on that note, welcome to all, and over to you, Ambassador Wadhwa, to take over the forum.
Thank you very much, Sabya. Thank you for the introduction. I must say this is an extremely timely initiative because as we await, I think with some amount of anticipation, the annual Prime Ministerial level summit. And this is special because it will be the first visit by Prime Minister Takaichi to India for the annual PM level summit. And, so we have a lot of expectations from this visit. I was just thinking as we were preparing for this, and the Asian Confluence, we operate out of Shillong. We work a lot in the Northeast, not only exclusively, but the Northeast, the Bay of Bengal, and so on, and very much part of the Act East policy. But when I was thinking of it, I thought, Prime Minister Takaichi was actually supposed to come, and the summit was supposed to be held in Guwahati. And this is the second time that this has happened. Prime Minister Abe also wanted to come to Guwahati. And couldn't come for reasons. And this time, I believe Prime Minister Takaichi has not been able to come because of logistics, and particularly because of her preoccupations back home, parliamentary preoccupations. But be that as that may, what this says is the importance of the Northeast in the India-Japan partnership. I think it's a very, very critical hinge, a strategic hinge in the relationship. Because, it connects, of course, the free and open Indo-Pacific policy of Japan, which is going to complete its 10th anniversary, our own Act East policy. But more importantly, it connects a very important part of India's eastern periphery, but also our neighboring countries to the larger Indo-Pacific. And therefore, this part of India is a very, very important area. And so is what we do at the Asian Confluence. Now, Prime Minister Takaichi, I was looking at what she's supposed to focus on. She is, of course, going to carry out the agenda of what was agreed to at the last summit. When Prime Minister Modi went last year, to Japan, I mean, there were a lot of vision statements which set targets. I mean, they set targets, numerical targets in terms of how much investment would come in, other kinds of targets, and with actually how we were going to attain them. So it was a very practical kind of outcome that came from the summit. And she's surely going to work on that when she comes. And in all of this and the churn that has happened in the world, what has happened is the fact of the importance of economic security. We talked about, security was always strategic, military, whatever. The importance of this, and I think Japan brought this onto the international agenda, how important the economic security of countries was. And now I think this coming with 50 key business leaders to India is saying that India is going to be a very, very important partner for Japan in this particular area. And we're also, of course, connectivity is going to be part of it. And when we talk about connectivity, we don't limit it to really, land and maritime connectivity. Very important the context of what we're going to talk about. But we're also now increasingly talking about supply chain resilience. When you're talking about that, you're talking about, resilient trade corridors and different kinds of corridors. There, energy corridors, energy grids in this part of the world. So there are various aspects to it, and I'm sure we have such an eminent panel, and they're definitely going to touch on this. Now, what I would suggest is that, each one of our panelists will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. Thereafter, we will open, of course, as Sabia, you mentioned, we will open it to questions. And I hope you'll help me, and the people will be able to say to whom they're addressing these questions. And I'm sure the panelists will be very happy to take it. And I do want to say that I think we take this opportunity, Sabia, to give your wider vision. I know you've been very sort of, you sort of play down your own role, but I know what the Asian Conference does in this connectivity, particularly with ASEAN and Japan. So we'd be very interested to hear what more we need to do in terms of strategic connectivity. So with those few words, I'm going to start with Ambassador Hiramatsu. Ambassador Hiramatsu, as Sabya said very correctly, is really a pioneer insofar as the relations with the Northeast is concerned. Because he not he started Kizuna, but I remember going with him right very early, maybe in 2015 or 16, and the Act East Forum and what we started with the Northeast. He's been really played a very important role, and we're delighted to have him on the advisory council of ASCON, of the Asian Confluence. He's also the chairman of the Institute of International Strategy at the Japan Research Institute, and is working a lot on tourism. So, Ambassador Hiramatsu, I'd love to hear your views, really the larger picture that there is, picture of the importance of the Northeast, of connectivity, but the larger picture of FOIP and Japan's policy. But I'm going to ask you something a little extra, because you're an advisor to the World Tourism Organization. And one of the great, I think, ways of connecting people, connectivity is connecting people. So what more can we do to make our Northeast probably tourism friendly and connecting people between our two countries? So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, my friend Deepa-san, for your very kind introduction. Let me speak 10 to 12 minutes as giving you some overall picture about Japan-India partnership. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for the invitation to this webinar organized by Asian Conference. I'm particularly grateful to Executive Director Sabia Datta for your invitation in organizing such a timely and meaningful forum. The international order is currently undergoing a structural transition, while the rise of China is giving birth to a so-called G2 world. The rapid development of the global south, with India at its center, is also paving the way for the multi-alignment international community. Within this landscape, India is actively and astutely deploying a foreign policy that prioritizes strategic autonomy under its positioning as the leader of the global south. The entire world is now gazing intently at rising India. On the other hand, as trust in the United States experiences fluctuations, and nations worldwide diversify their diplomatic relations, I sense that expectations and interests towards Japan are rising significantly. As the search for the new international order begins, the potential and necessity for further cooperation between Japan and India, often described as the most natural strategic relationship, have grown more compelling than ever. We must elevate our relationship with India to an even higher level. Yet, there remains much to be done. We must not be complacent with our long history of friendship ties. The upcoming visit of Prime Minister Takaichi to India should be seized as a golden opportunity to revitalize a special strategic and global partnership through innovative perspectives. To this end, I'd like to articulate the following core points. First, we must strengthen our strategic dialogue at every tier. I recall vividly during my tenure as ambassador when Prime Minister Modi visited Japan in 2016. Aboard the Shinkansen traveling from Tokyo to Kobe, Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi spread out a map of the Indo-Pacific and spent nearly 2 hours engaged in deep strategic discussion regarding the geopolitical dynamics of this region. It was precisely this high-level deliberation that led to a shared vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific OIP and ultimately catalyzed the establishment of the Quad. During this upcoming visit, I earnestly hope that the leaders will engage thoroughly in such a strategic discussion from elevated visionary perspectives. Furthermore, deepening exchanges between leading Indian think tanks, such as Asian Conference, and their Japanese counterparts, is of paramount importance for strengthening intellectual dialogue among experts of both countries. Second is the strengthening of connectivity centered on India. Recently, India has launched initiatives such as India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, and I2U2, working diligently to develop corridors leading westward from India. For more than a decade, I have advised Japanese companies expanding into India that a massive market extends to India's west, and that they should collaborate with Indian entrepreneurs to tap into this market. Recently, the government of Japan has also articulated the initiative of the Indian Ocean African Economic Zone concept, viewing this region as a comprehensive economic zone for Japanese business. Looking eastward from India, Prime Minister Modi, under the Act East policy, placed particular emphasis on the development of the Northeast region. Japan stands as a most critical partner in this policy. During my time as ambassador, I worked alongside with the then Foreign Secretary, now External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, to launch the Act East Forum, through which we implemented various projects, primarily in infrastructure development, via public-private partnership in the Northeast region. In his 2023 policy speech on FOIP, delivered in Delhi, then Prime Minister Kishida proposed advancing the Bay of Bengal, Northeast India industrial value chain concept to foster growth across the entire region. This concept aims to connect this region to the Bay of Bengal, not merely through infrastructure, but also via business integration. I am deeply grateful to see the progress on various projects under the Act East Forum, such as recently inaugurated 6 national highway project in Meghalaya and a project utilizing bamboo. Coupled with the establishment of the semiconductor industrial park in Assam, the development of the Northeast region is advancing. Japan aspires to remain an enduring partner for the Northeast region. By linking Northeast Corridor with ASEAN-Japan Connectivity Initiative, we can bring India-Japan even closer together. Constructing corridors that center on India, spanning west to Middle East and Europe, and east to ASEAN and Japan, perfectly aligned with the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific advocated by Japan. This is an essential pillar upon which Japan and India must join forces. We also require connectivity in strategic goods such as semiconductors and critical minerals. This enhances supply chain resilience and represents the connectivity of goods and technology moving beyond mere infrastructure. In the updated Free and Open Indo-Pacific recently announced by Prime Minister Takaichi, enhancing the resilience of supply chains for energy and critical minerals was highlighted as a foremost priority area. Japanese semiconductor manufacturers are showing a surge of interest in the semiconductor fabrication facilities currently under construction in Gujarat and Assam. It is my sincere hope that as many enterprises as possible will venture into India within the semiconductor sector. Then another major imperative in the connectivity domain is strengthening people-to-people exchanges. Business exchanges have expanded in recent years, but mutual understanding and grassroots exchanges, including among the youth, remain insufficient. In particular, I sense that perception of India within Japan often remains tethered to outdated stereotypes that do not reflect current realities. Progress is being made in welcoming tourists, researchers, and engineers from India. However, the flow of people from Japan to India remains inadequate, and we must widen and strengthen this flow. In particular, we hope to welcome more talent from Northeast to Japan. At the same time, I wish for more Japanese people to experience the rich natural beauty of the Northeast and engage with warm-hearted people. To elevate connectivity, regional initiatives extending beyond bilateral efforts are essential. In the Northeast region, the BIMSTEC framework holds great importance, while ASEAN plays a central role in the broader free and open Indo-Pacific. In this sense, the Quad bears a vital responsibility for enhancing connectivity in the Indo-Pacific. Recently, the Quad has undertaken concrete initiatives to strengthen supply chain resilience for strategic goods like critical minerals. The Quad is also critical for ensuring the sustained engagement of the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. The strategic value of the Quad cannot be overstated. Working together to ensure Quad becomes an increasingly meaningful entity is another vital theme for Japan-India cooperation. Another indispensable area of connectivity is facilitating the smooth flow of goods and services through expansion of free trade agreements and economic partnership agreements. I welcome India's recent conclusion of such agreements with numerous nations. I also look forward to an early conclusion with the US-India trade agreement. Furthermore, Japan places the utmost importance on the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, and it's endeavoring to expand its network. It is my sincere hope that day will come when India, too, chooses to join this agreement. To propel the India-Japan relationship forward, nothing is more critical than for the leaders of both countries to pay annual reciprocal visit and execute concrete policies based on the agreements reached therein. Prime Minister Takaichi's upcoming visit to India represents a highly significant resumption of this annual reciprocal cycle. It is especially meaningful that a large delegation of business leaders is accompanying Prime Minister Takaichi on this visit. I would like to note that Japanese investment into India last year has surged by 1.5 times compared to the previous year, demonstrating immense momentum. I hope this momentum will catalyze a multitude of new investments and corporate alliances encompassing advanced industries, small and medium-sized enterprises, and startups alike. Beyond this, our horizon for cooperation remains vast, spanning defense equipment, space, environmental technologies. Next year, we'll celebrate the special milestone of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Japan and India. Building upon the achievements of the Prime Minister's next visit, we must strengthen our cooperation across all sectors and deliver concrete outcomes to ensure that next year heralds a period of even greater exponential leaps for both nations. It is my fervent hope that Japan and India will truly become indispensable partners to one another. So thank you very much, Iba-san.
So much, so very much. Kenji-san, Ambassador Hiramatsu, as expected, this phenomenal sort of overview of changing global geopolitics, the dynamics of it. And in this context, the importance to strengthen our own dialogue, not only at the government level, but through think tanks. I think this is most welcome and most necessary now because, so there is so much of change and we've got to understand, not only understand the change, but what we can do to work together. So thank you so much. But I think one of the things you said which I found most interesting and which I perhaps missed was that when we're talking connectivity, we keep looking east. But we should start looking west, as you say, quite correctly. And now that India is into this IMEC, of course, there are issues right now in that part of the world, but Africa too. So what can India and Japan do together in Africa, in the Middle East, and then, as a sort of have a corridor, our own corridor, so if I may call it so, India, Japan, Japan, India, Middle East, Africa, Europe. And I think this is something, an area where we need to work together. We are doing some stuff. There's a lot of potential here. So thank you for bringing that back onto the agenda. I think it's very, very important. You mentioned that, yes, I remember Prime Minister Kishida saying that how the Northeast was such an important pillar of FOIP as far as Japan was concerned. And in that context, there are about 20 important ODA projects of Japan, just in the Northeast. And as I mentioned, the reason that we see such a big footprint of Japan and we welcome it is because what I call the T factor, the trust factor. Japan is the most trusted country as far as we're concerned for projects in our sensitive peripheries, be it the Northeast or be it the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So more important, it's a strategic partner, it's a special partner, but it's also very importantly a trusted partner. You've raised a lot of issues, including the people-to-people, relations and the area of environment, how important that is. And with this, I'll move over to Ranjit, Mr. Ranjit Barthakur, very well known in the Northeast. He's played multiple roles, environmentalist, I think representative of the Tatas, representative of Indian industry. I don't think there's any aspect of the growth of the Northeast, or for that matter, beyond connectivity into Myanmar, Bangladesh, that whole area that you haven't had a role to play in. So, Ranjit, I'd be very happy if you could talk about, one important area is really environmental sustainability, because when we are looking at such large infrastructure projects in the Northeast, which we require, but I think there is some criticism that comes, or there are concerns, let me not call it criticism, about how do you ensure that these are sustainable projects, environmentally sustainable. Also, I think when we look at 8 sectors, at the last summit, one very important sector really was related to green hydrogen, to carbon capture, to environmental technologies. So, what can we do in that area? What can we do in context of trade? And I think also, I'd really like to hear from you because of the project that you had yourself, which was mentioned by Sabya. What can we do to attract more Japanese tourists to that region? They love nature, and the Northeast has so much to offer for Japanese tourists. We now have a target of 500,000 exchanges, which was set by prime ministers. What can the Northeast do to contribute to this? Over to you.
Thank you, ambassadors. Thank you so much for this, Monish and Sabya. Thank you for organizing this sort of the Asian Confluence. The name is so apt. It's just that Japan happens to be the catalyst for actually doing this Asian Confluence, if not the Asian influence. So thank you for that. My focus, will remain in the Eastern Himalayas and Northeast, even though what Ambassador said just now is important, that we have to look west. And this entire geopolitics is changing so much that the entire supply mechanism has to link in the West naturally, especially the Middle East, which is playing such an important role to the entire process of development in any way that we want. Let me just make a few comments. I just thought I'll make one comment, and maybe we've forgotten this. In 1960, the Japanese came, and in same Jagi Road, where we are doing the semiconductor, set up the first Assam spun silk mill. And that somehow has got into bad days. But in fact, recently when I talked to the chief minister, he said, no, that's a good idea because silk is such an important one. And I'll come back to that. But the 1960 is when Japan made its first big investment in machinery and the thought. My own uncle went to Japan to study in 1938, and he came back to study sericulture, and a whole movement started because a lot of Japanese people came. And because he studied in the Imperial University in Tokyo for 3-4 years, he actually knew Japanese, and being a government officer, he became almost the official spokesman for Japan, but also the translator. So it was easy when you have people learning the language. Thirdly, I think it is important that recently the chief minister agreed that in the universities where we should start Japanese as a learning mechanism. Otherwise, how would we be able to use human beings, which we are the conduit for actually the entire cross-cultural highway, where we are wanting healthcare, where we are wanting old care, where we are wanting, cultural connect. How would that happen? So Japanese has been introduced, and I think it's a very important thing. Otherwise, they're having to go to Singapore, learn in Singapore, and then go to Japan. So I think with that, let me just explain once more and re-emphasize, I think, the importance of the Bay of Bengal initiative, which really was started by this dialogue and by ambassadors and the countries of Japan and India. I think this Bay of Bengal, you have to look at it as one unit. Because if you didn't have the politics and you didn't have separation, it's one big unit. It's called the Eastern Himalayas. In some cases, it's called the Indo-Malayan realm, and it goes right up to Malaysia. So if you look at this connectivity without the border areas, this entire thing is a very big, important block of cultural potpourri. And this potpourri helps in many ways, other than just talking about the delivery. More than that, most of these confluences, unlike the Asian confluence, have been able to focus on actual delivery. And so those actual delivery of points, including the roadway structure, the entire 6 nation projects, that ODA, the largest ODA actually into the Northeast, is from Japan. So it is a very important movement that has happened over 10 years. And I think Ambassador Hiramatsu has been at the helm of this affair, other than the East-West corridor, other than the North-West corridor in which they were involved. So I think with that, I think it's important to understand the Indo-Japan partnership is not just another trade FTA. It is actually a partnership of both head, heart, and hand. And I think it's important that we understand if 1960 they came here to help the revolution of Mulberry, I think we have actually a very good potential to take this forward. Having said that, the oldest highway between India, Japan, and I'm just doing this in the context of many of the viewers, I'm sure people on this panel are completely aware, is actually the highway of created by the Thai Pake and Thai Kamti people who actually came from the Shan tribes and actually helped in to mix and actually help to synthesize the whole process of Buddhism. So Buddhism was a very big cultural highway that went in to Japan. Not that I'm promoting any religion, but what I'm trying to say, the Bodh Gaya Northeast Connect was very important. So there was a very interesting business person who owned Bangkok Airways in Thailand. So he said, I'll tell you, we'll do something. We will give you Bangkok Airways because the Japanese come to Bangkok and we have a connectivity. We will give you Guwahati for wildlife tourism. And from Guwahati, get us permission to go to Bodh Gaya. From Bodh Gaya, we'll go back to either Tokyo or to Bangkok. So this was the route that he suggested in line with the tourism that Ambassador, both of you have talked about, and the fact that the people to people connect based on realism rather than say that, okay, let's do it. So this was really what Bangkok Airways did. The challenge that we had with the government of India did not give on the bilateral flight sharing basis the landing rights to Gaya. So to them, it was not a complete deal. So it is there for the taking. I think this is really what we can do. This is something that we can work on. The second thing in trying to understand how countries integrate, I think looking at the old systems of just trade and defined trade does not work. So out of the box thinking, like the one that for Delhi to Bombay, the connectivity of that corridor was an important kind of challenge. So our challenge really in the Northeast is what is it that we do which are different? And that is how we got the semiconductor industry. It took us 8 years to basically do it. I'm saying Japan has not as yet played a fully important role. They're playing a very important role, but in terms of its expansion. That semiconductor industry was for wafers. So it's not just about wafers, it's about the real semiconductor making. And that's not really as exciting an industry as the wafer business. So I think Japan will have to help us to play this. They've already come. For example, last week when I visited, I know that Nippon Freight, that is going to be a very important changing dimension. I'm giving examples in this, webinar, just to tell people that things are happening and these are real things on the ground and this is what people can go after. And therefore, Nippon Freight is setting up an entire logistics hub. And they're already opening in Jagido to take the finished wafers and take it to either airports or take it to, meaning when the river opens to Bangladesh, take it to the ports and then take it forward. Thirdly, it is very important when we talk Northeast, the entire subroom opening up with the port that Japan has done in Bangladesh is a very critical thing. The landlord part of Northeast has been opened up by Japan in terms of exit. So now, obviously, because of the geopolitical reasons, we have problems. But that doesn't mean these problems never remain and we have to continue to do it. So Agartala, Mizoram, and the entire south part of the entire Silchar Valley, the Barak Valley, has been connected with Bangladesh thanks to the Japanese port, which is meaning very operational, very modern, and very, very functional in terms of throughput. So I'm saying that reduces from Agartala, you can actually get to Chittagong in 1 hour. Now with that, and then from there, this port is just sort of there. So you're actually in the real world instead of going from Agartala all the way to Guwahati, there, North Bengal, back to Calcutta, and then port. So I think there is a lot of things on the ground that have happened. Let me talk about the cultural highway a little more. I think it's very important to understand that the music movement from Japan to Assam, and from Assam to Japan especially, if not the whole of the Northeast, has been very functional. Recently, there were friends of mine who are going, actually colleagues, who said, I said, where are you going? They said, oh, we're going to Tokyo for this big show. I said, what is that show? So there was an international group, meaning there were a European group who were performing in Tokyo. And here we had Northeastern people wanting to go. At the same time, you can also see this entire music, K-pop, which has really happened, has spread a lot from Tokyo. So at the grassroots level, I think somewhere down the line, we should reintroduce the Japan, Assam, Northeast, the musical scenario, because this musical scenario goes really down to the grassroots level. And this type of tourism, which ambassadors were both talking about, I think is very critical to tap the young people who will want to go. They learn 10 words of Japanese. The Japanese learn 10 words for Assam. Now, Assam will become a very big sort of hub for music tourism. For example, the big old timers are all coming in November and December to Guwahati. So we are hoping that we will be able to connect Bangladesh, Myanmar, the whole of the ASEAN and Japan to this. There are 6 areas which I would like to do, and I'm just aware that everybody is waiting. But the concept of nature neutrality is absolutely vital. The Eastern Himalayas are a very important part for life and living. And if the Eastern Himalayas in some way go down, then we all have a problem, especially 160 million people of Bangladesh and the whole of the sub-Himalayan region from Nepal right down to Myanmar because of the Indo-Malayan realm. Because the water tower of the world, unfortunately or fortunately, is actually Tibet. And through Tibet flows down very, very good, productive sort of water. And these water systems, as to how to recycle, what to do, is something that we need to work. It is not just about hydroelectric dams. Of course, we must build it. Everybody needs energy security. Everybody needs economic security. Both points, Ambassador, you talked about, Ambassador Wadhwa, you talked about. And I think that is important that we do that. But at the same time, we must understand, you see, last week, there was a big dam burst in Pasighat and in Arunachal, and the whole everybody got just flooded out. So we have to be aware of what we're doing and how to optimize this. And Japan is very well tuned. You know, they had this massive disaster in Fukushima, and I've been very involved in my heart with Japan. So therefore, I know almost every incident that happened, and they basically corrected that in spite of the fact that it was a tsunami and water came in, etc. And that was nuclear. So can you imagine the kind of challenges they've recovered from, other than the fact that the earthquake system in Japan is what we're doing. So in Jagi Road, we've actually used the Japanese metrics to see that the earthquakes don't actually create a disaster. So learning and cultural delivery can also be knowledge delivery. And this knowledge delivery of earthquake mechanism, managing hydrogen, managing energy, is something that we have to actually neutralize and officialize in our programs in the Northeast. I'm not just saying Japan, it could be Korea or anything else, but Japan is the T factor, the trust factor. So if we use that T factor for Japan, we have a lead ahead. Next point is what I think is very important for Japan is cooperated in terms of the bioethanol project in Numaligarh with bamboo. Now, this whole bamboo process, bamboo is such a thing that the both civilizations are bamboo civilization. It's quite interesting that bamboo is eaten, bamboo is worn, bamboo clothes are there, bamboo houses are there, the songs are around bamboo. So I think both these nations, both these countries and both these areas are so important that we actually romanticize with bamboo much more than we do. You know, to us, bamboo is a poor man's toy. It is meant for actually the fencing in a house in the village. It is meant for some backward thing. But you go to Japan and just see the use of bamboo and value addition. Recently, a friend of mine who works with Japan and actually is in Bangkok, and I happen to be on that board, he said that why don't you make this thing out of silk, you know, shawl out of silk, of eri silk, because eri is an ahimsa silk. And ahimsa is something where it is totally fitting in with the bill of Satoyama, which is actually the cultural synthesis and philosophy of coexistence between nature and human beings. So he gave us the shawl. So we did the shawl in Assam and sent it. And you won't believe it, but actually the shawl, they said, in Japan would sell for $30,000 and it cost us only $1,000 to make. I'm just saying the Japanese pay for something which is nature friendly. I'm not saying the Japanese have a lot of money to pay, but all I'm trying to say that if we work on that route of bamboo and silk, I think there is something that we will be able to do. So the 6 areas, I don't know how much time I have left, Sabya, I hope.
Yeah. I think maybe another couple of minutes.
Yeah,
Would be.
okay.
Thanks.
So I think it is important. There are 6 areas which I think would be very important. One is around silk, two is bamboo, and the silk thing we don't have to make it the modern business of development. That everything we put in factories, we put in silk, and make it. There are 4 types of silk which get in Assam, which nowhere in the world you get. I'm saying, and this is something which would be really good for the corridor because Japan in itself can re-export to what you said, the West in many ways other than to America. Then we've got the entire bamboo cane corridor. The bamboo cane corridor is important. We do realize that Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam have a very good edge on it because their products and inputs are very good. But we have started developing it, and thanks to Japan, we have also been able to develop much more bamboo for the bioethanol project, for which they have given us not only advice but machinery and the inputs that are required. The next is obviously the music element. The other thing is, I think, which people ignore, is there's a nice kind of bean which is called axon. It's on the food of Naga people have this food. And this food is actually, axon is something which the Japanese people, when you go, they'll wrap it up and give it to you, this bean, which is similar to what the Naga people do. And I'm saying it's something that we have not been able to modernize. Food is modernized in so many places. The way we make tandoori is modernized. The way we make vegetables, we are a vegetable capital of the world, because when you come to India and you eat vegetarian food, you feel you don't need non-vegetarian. But this axon is a very good item that we should look at. Then I think this knowledge corridor of Nalanda to Nora, I think is something that we have neglected, especially Northeast, Bodh Gaya. This is something that we really need to do. Then we need to work on the civilizational solidarity. And this was done by Netaji Bose. I think Netaji Bose, during his independence movement and the Indian National Army, which was really a synthesis between Japan and India, he really talked about civilizational solidarity in trying to maintain peace and independence, yet it has to be sustainable. There's a whole note on this delivery item, and it actually could be done in different ways, which we could practice. Last but not least, we must forget the entire COP movement that the world is talking about started in Japan in 1997. Kyoto Protocol is actually the basis of sustainable living. This entire business of having to do Satoyama was 1997 in Kyoto did it. So Kyoto University and us, we have a very good relationship in terms of actually practicing. So this Kyoto Protocol is really something which is really the sustainable part of really what Japan has given to the world. And it's not just about Assam, it is what we do, but the Eastern Himalayan needs to be preserved so that we don't destroy it. And then we try and do another Kyoto Protocol to save it, This Kyoto Protocol, the norms and delivery, which has since then had 20, 30 Kyoto Protocols, haven't. COPs. But we have not been able to actualize it and say that this is actually part of what I would call the Asian influence and Asian confluence. I think this is something that we need to do. I'll end here, but I can open up this whole discussion in more ways than one. But thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattakur. Thank you, Ranjit. Most fascinating, and the ideas you've thrown up. I mean, each one of them resonates. I wish that you can, these inputs do reach somewhere with our policymakers, particularly, when you talk about really cross-cultural connectivity and, civilizational connectivity. There's something very dear to me also, and at some point of time, I'd love to talk to you about it. I love this concept of Satoyama, and also when you talk about connection in terms of, educational connect through Nalanda, Nara. So there's so much to be done in terms of, really we are very similar in civilizational terms. And I think that's important. And again, talking about the importance of the Eastern Himalayas and the entire belt which goes on from there to the Bay of Bengal and onwards, and how they're all connected, and that India and Japan can work together. You're very right in saying that, in terms of sericulture and some very, very key areas in our development. Japan has been a partner from 1958. And I love to add this little, story to say that actually ODA to India was introduced by Prime Minister Abe's father, Prime Minister Kishi, when he visited India in the 1950s, and he made this offer of helping India in its development, and that's been one of the main pillars of our relationship. So there is so much that we can do together, and we can do also for the area. But you really come out with some extremely, extremely interesting concepts and also concrete examples on the semiconductor industry. We've also been having some meetings in the context of Kizuna, which is with Japan, and in the Northeast. But to see that projects are taking off, because we're not only talking about fab, we're not only talking about manufacture, but there's a whole ecosystem, including logistics, which we should develop in the Northeast. And very much like the India-Japan success in the automotive industry, where Japan helped us develop and also sort of export to the world, and in a way export to Japan also, and be one of its biggest markets. We should do that in the semiconductor space. The most interesting. Thank you very much again, Ranjit. That's been very, very useful and interesting. And Monish, now over to you. I know that you look at the strategic space, which is much wider. You're looking at not only the Indo-Pacific, but I think also in the context of India-Japan relations and the Indo-Pacific, and what we can do bilaterally, regionally. And I think in a way, both of us are, important countries, and we have our own philosophies. And I think we should be able to bring this to the table. For example, if you really look at, I don't want to call the China factor, but I do believe that India and Japan together have a different and alternative to offer to the world. So over to you, Monish, and really look forward to hear from you. I'm always very impressed by your interventions wherever I hear you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chair, for the kind introduction. And I know it's going to be a hard act to follow in the next 10 minutes following such experienced practitioners for a young, inexperienced academic like me. But I'll stick to, true to my job and training. I'll stick to, to the interface between academia and public policy that I have, and try to reflect on some of the broader questions that Chair has put. I think I'll start by saying that the appreciation of the intents, and if I may add another word, dense collaboration, and I emphasize the word dense collaboration. We need to look at the temporal, the time that this relationship has covered. And while I was sort of making my notes and preparing for this webinar, I was looking at, discussions and talks that were given 10 years back, 8 years back, 3 years back, and trying to make a sense of how this relationship has grown over the years and has progressed over the years. And block by block, we have, added to the density of the relationship, if I put it that way. And in fact, I think to any cursory examination of this relationship, one cannot forego in noticing the fact that it has really gone dense over the years. And I think the second point that I have is in terms of even what Mr. Bodhakurji put it, that the geography, right, the logic of the geography that this relationship has sort of capitalized in the recent times. Of course, you have the FOIP and the ECIS policy that ends the Eastern geography and the linkages that we have both in the maritime sense and the continental sense. And in that sense, I think geography becomes a strategy in sense. And I have been sort of thinking through this in many ways. I call it the return of geography with a vengeance. Even though we had kind of out-written geography with globalization to some extent, it's sort of coming back in so many ways. And I think this relationship realizes and recognizes the essence of geography and how do we leverage that. I think India-Japan relationship and the progress that we have seen is also a reflection of India's evolving ties with the broader West. If you look at Japan, geographically, it's an Eastern country, but if you look at the kind of progress that it has made, the technological sort of leaps that it has made, there is a larger, I think, convergence with the geopolitical West also, and you can't forgo the US factor in that, in terms of both the opportunities that US has provided in this relationship and also the challenges through which we need to navigate now, in terms of the fact that there's a lot of headlines going on in terms of the Indo-PACOM becoming the PACOM, and what are the implications of that, the optics and the reality of that. Ambassador Kenji-san did mention briefly about the Quad. I'm one of those people who really believe that uh, optics are not policies, and that's why we need to stay the course in Quad, in the sense that the functional cooperation and institutional depth that the Quad has covered over the years may have changed in intensity according to geopolitical realities, but it is still a very important sort of a gluing factor between India and Japan, and we look at how we look at the broader Indo-Pacific. I think this relationship is fairly important also in terms of looking at how we link vision and action. And in terms of linking vision and action, I think what is important to sort of like consider is then to ask what is required for the action. And that's where comes in the question of matching intentions and capabilities. We have a lot of intentions about doing a lot of things, right, across the board. And I think the two former speakers have fairly laid out a very broad brush and a very granular um, uh, perspective of what are the kind of things which are really happening on the ground. And I think that's where the capabilities that Japan has in the tech sector, and also the best experiences that Japan has in building sustainability projects, and also in terms of, let's say, disaster management, which are very fairly applicable to what was mentioned, the Eastern Himalayas and the Northeast. I think across the board, right, from semiconductors to people capacity building, Japan really plays an important role in terms of, matching capabilities and intentions if we are, thinking of like translating vision into implementation and action. I think from, again, a little bit of like, I'll throw in a 30 seconds of academic intervention, that if you look at the Japan-India relationship over the last 20-25 years, I think what has really happened is to look at the three levels of matchmaking, which is, there has been a structural sort of geopolitical structural circumstances which has provided that broader geopolitical environment for these two countries to come together in a more intense way. Then there is the nature of political systems, on the second level, which is that both are democracies, and despite minute and granular differences in how the democracies are playing out in these two countries, there is a broader sort of convergence in terms of how there is convergence in political systems. And of course, the last but not the least level is the role of leadership. And to this, we have often spoken about the role of Shinzo Abe-san and succeeding prime ministers, and also the succeeding prime ministers in India's case, how block by block, like a baton that is passed in a relay race, the baton has been passed from one administration to another in terms of how leadership has played a role. I think this next point is about building legitimacy together in the neighborhood and beyond through triangular cooperation and other frameworks. And this is where what Ambassador Wadawa said about trust. I think what Japan and India has done over the years is to look at trust not as an esoteric term in international relations, but as something which has to be incentivized. When you incentivize trust lasts longer. And I think it is reflected in many of the projects that we are doing, which is really shaping regional security complexes to, if I may call it, regional development corridors. And I think the future of development cooperation plays a very important role in this partnership, and how our DPA model sort of like merges together with the development model that Japan has. And I think it's the right time to hit here in terms of the kind of relationship that we are building in the Andaman and Nicobar, in the maritime space, in terms of largely from a point of developing smart islands and smart ports, matching sort of, again, capabilities and intentions in that area, looking at all levels of security from a maritime security context to an economic security context to an energy security context, and from a maritime security context, really sort of like force enabling the role that the Tri-Service Command in the Andaman and Nicobar plays, which is, to look really closely at the kind of robust capabilities that Japan has when it comes to anti-submarine warfare capabilities. The optic fiber cables, the reconnaissance, the surveillance that Japan has an experience in. We have been working with the Americans in this area also to a large extent. If you look at the largest patrol maritime aircraft, it's the P-8 aircraft, which is part of the India-US cooperation. So if you look at the official security assistance program and the kind of relationship that Japan and India can do in the defense cooperation, which takes it and moves it from cooperation to co-production, and co-development, and maybe immediately not in the frontline attack capabilities, but definitely in more non-lethal, you know, uh, non-lethal pillars of defense security and maritime security that two countries can work on. Really, that helps in building a comprehensive deterrence in the larger Indo-Pacific. I'll end with 2 points. I think, you know, that we need to sort of like delve a little bit more on like the evolving nature of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, and where Japan and India can play an important role, also in terms of working together in the very fragmented but also rapidly shifting and evolving tech ecosystem. The digital corridors, which are becoming an important part of both economic energy and also the maritime security. And in that sense, I think I'll just end by saying that I'll be just repeating people when I say there's a whole of nation approach that is required in India-Japan relationship, and connectivity not to be done to the region, but to be done with the region. I'll end with those words, and happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Monish. I mean, so much food for thought, just as an academic would put it, but you also give concrete examples of what can be done. I think, you call it, we keep looking at words to really to be able to define the relationship. And I'll add to the various adjectives that I have normally used, this thing of dense. It's very true. It's a very dense relationship. There's so many elements, and it keeps increasing the areas of cooperation. I think it's very useful for, I can bring out what are the drivers of our convergence. And you talk about the political drivers, the democracies, the leadership. So I think that is something that is really also very important, and we tend to take it for granted. And also how both of us can work in third geographies. This is something that stays in a way as an intention, but has really not happened concretely on ground. And I think we should be looking more at this in terms of regional connectivity. So, a lot of food for thought. And thank you for touching on security, because when you look at strategic, connectivity, security is so important. And this is where you talked about in anti-submarine warfare and so on, that we are increasingly working together with Japan. And I think with now in a way that the loosening up of their, defense policy, particularly in terms of exports of defense and lethal defense equipment and so on, we could look at areas where we could work together. So thank you. I mean, you've been an amazing, amazing panel. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sabya. Sabya, you perhaps can add a bit of what we do in the Asian Conference. I don't know if there's enough time for questions, but I must say for me, it's been a most fascinating experience hearing all of you. And thank you very much. Over to you, Sabya.
Thank you. I think, ma'am, there is not much time left, but I think in due fairness, because we have many viewers, I think we can take one or two questions. And I think Commander Sujit Samadar is asking, how do Japan and India together propose to jointly work with ASEAN? And there are other questions on connectivity. And to that, I think I'd just like to add my own comment that, and reflecting on what Ambassador Hiramatsu said about the anecdote of Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi in the Shinkansen many years back, looking over a map, and going over, we've covered looking westward on the IMEC connectivity towards the ASEAN, looking at the Andamans. and being from the northeast, I think it's the corridor to the Bay of Bengal, from Sabroom to Matarbari, which is again a very big deep sea port that the Japanese are building, and also looking at the other components such as the India Myanmar Thailand highway, or even the Kaladan multimodal. Uh, these are all areas. So connectivity to the Bay of Bengal, connectivity to westward to Europe, or to the Straits of Malacca. I think this will need a lot of cooperation, uh, collaboration, co-production, and I hope that in our next Kizuna, which is slated for next year, we can also go over these elements and draw from what is coming out of this summit. I'll take one or two more questions. Um, what is the impact of Indo-Japan collaboration on Indian socio-political scenario, and will the relation be expected to counter regional hegemony? Ma'am, I think if you as the chair, I think if you can address that, that would be great.
Thank you. I mean, I think this was in a way addressed by Munish when he talked about the fact that the drivers of convergence in our relationship is really the fact that we're democracies, leaderships, we have common values. So to that extent, we do work together. Like, your question is very broad brush. The socio-political, I mean, political in the sense that we're both democracies and therefore we know the importance of it and in political institutions, and we do have cooperation and collaboration strengthening these institutions. In the Japanese projects also that we work with, where we have agreement, these are, of course, the importance of what Japan does in India is that Japan works in areas where we need help. They respond to our needs. And I should say that in this entire area, they're very they're very responsive to be able to work where we have a need. The other, of course, I mean, I'm not very sure of regional hegemony of who, but all I can say is that, we do have converging interests, and we discuss a lot of where we would like to see the region. We look at the larger region. And if you're looking at, China and so on, I mean, it's part of our discussions. And we quite independent of China. I think we have a very strong relationship that we believe the relationship is important for what it is worth, and not necessarily in the context of anybody else.
Right. And I also want to just echo some comments. The people watching from Nagaland, Kohima, say with a lot of interest. Mr. Joyrimba from Manipur remembers how Ambassador Hiramatsu visited the Northeast, and there is also a question from the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. And somebody from West Bengal saying people of West Bengal have immense goodwill for people in Japan. Bengal is looking forward to cultural and economic investment in West Bengal. I think I just wanted to add to that post the recent elections, I think now there is with the political alignments between there is a lot of scope for looking at east, northeast, and onward corridors, and um, I think if we can work with Japan on looking at the entire eastern quadrant, that would be great. Maybe Munish, you might want to comment something on that, if you wish.
I think, Sabia, again, thank you. In the paucity of time, I forgot to thank Escon and you in particular. But in the larger framework of the relationship and the cooperation that we are building, I think it will be just an understatement to say how important is the eastern part of the country, and also its sort of like natural projection into the eastern neighborhood. So I think in all sense, we have just scratched the surface of the partnership in terms of the things that we can do together on different levels, right from the cultural linkages that my co-pilot so expertly spoke about, and the kind of development projects that we're carrying out in the eastern neighborhood. I think if there was like the question that Ambassador Wadawa addressed, I'd just like to again, second her and add that India and Japan, I think, are really interested in shaping the regional order in the Indo-Pacific, with or without, like the consideration of um, the shifting sort of, uh, geopolitics that we are talking about. So I think I just end by saying that.
Yeah, I think we really run out of time, but uh, there is uh, there is a question about how the Japan uh, how Japan and India can, increase their regional, what you said about the regional trust in and with trilateral relationships. Uh, would Ambassador Hiramatsu, would you like to say a few words about how maybe some kind of trilateral programs can happen in the region with some third countries maybe to
Mm, mm,
foster these
mm,
kind of ideas moving forward.
mm. Um, Thank you, Sabio-san. Uh, it was fascinating to hear from all panelists about good ideas and good questions viewers posed to us. And with regard to more stable regional order, we should have more partners together. Someone mentioned about ASEAN. ASEAN is a very important part in this region. We are always saying that ASEAN is the centerpiece for the Indo-Pacific idea. So maybe I think India is now reaching out to ASEAN as a whole. Of course, Japan has a very traditional ties with ASEAN. So maybe you can have something together, a kind of trilateral dialogue among Japan, India, and ASEAN. That will be interesting to shape the new regional order, but also to create some new project in this region. So I think Japan and India can do many things centering on this important region of Northeast. So I'm happy to hear all of this, and maybe you can connect IMEC idea to the east. Maybe you can create something new corridor idea, and also north to south, and Bhutan, Nepal, Northeast, Bangladesh, Myanmar. These countries may work together more closely and to create new projects. I visited Bhutan many times. I had heard a lot about the Geref mindfulness city idea. It is still very early stage, but maybe you can connect this idea with the entire development of Northeast. Of course, I have a very special interest in semiconductor issues, so I'm hoping that new ecosystem will be created here. And also tourism. This is my favorite area, and how to attract people from Japan to Northeast. It is still challenging, but we can start from a kind of discussion among tourist industries, and maybe you can promote in a big way attraction of Northeast, and you have to do more about infrastructure development, good hotels, good connectivity, and also they can visit places in a very safe manner. So I want to comment on other points too, but thank you very much for this opportunity. I can learn a lot. Maybe I can continue discussing on these important points. Thank you, Sabian and
Thank,
Adiba-san.
thank you
Thank you so
very much. I think you've also echoed, looking at the geography that Mr. Bhattakur referred to, this, whole all the way from the mountains to the Himalayas to the Bay of Bengal and to Malaya. So I think we have really run out of time. So I would really like to uh, right now thank the chair and our esteemed panelists and the viewers for joining us on this webinar. Of course, this webinar remains on our social media channels for you to view. For those who have missed it, please tell your friends to view this online. at their own time. And I think the esteemed speakers have laid out a whole arena and portfolio of ideas that we can all take forward in our respective ways. And certainly many of them would really feature at our next Kizuna dialogue also. And I would also like to remind the viewers that we have part 2 of this webinar coming on Monday, which is on the 29th, where we go a bit more deep dive into the economic aspects of the relationship. So on that note, thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Thank you, Ambassador Hiramatsu, Mr. Bort Thakur, and of course, my friend, Mr. Munish Tongrumam. Thank you very, very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Sabya.
much.